You're listening to the Meet the Farmers podcast with me, your host, Ben Eagle. Please remember to subscribe to the show wherever you are listening. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 193 of the Meet the Farmers podcast with me, Ben Eagle. Today, we're on the Isle of Man for the first time to speak to father and son, Ean and Harry Parsons. Now, all I really know about the Isle of Man is the TT motorbike races, obviously, and the Manx cat. So I'm looking forward to hearing more today and discovering a little bit more. So the Parsons farm, it's a sheep and beef farm. It's at Laxey on the eastern side of the island. It's around 5,000 acres in area, with 3,500 of that moorland. Ean is also the current president of the Manx NFU and a former chair of its Meat and Livestock Committee. Harry is a student at Harper Adams, studying for a BSc in agriculture with farm business management. He's currently on his placement year, working as a trainee rural business advisor with SRH Agribusiness. Shout out to Simon. I'm sure that we'll have lots to talk about today, but particularly it'll be really, it's just be really interesting to learn about what the differences are. I suppose that's one thing I'm really interested in, the differences between the current UK and Isle of Man food and farming policies and just ways of farming generally. Just a little insight into farming on the Isle of Man. Harry, Ean, welcome to Meet the Farmers. How is your week going?
Thanks,
How
Ben.
wet are you?
We're very wet in the Isle of Man now, to be fair. We have a fairly high rainfall on the farm anyway. We're around about 65 to 70 inches annually, and it feels like half of that's fallen in the last 2 weeks.
Wow. Yeah. Harry, you're in Lancs.
Yeah, in true Lancashire fashion, yeah, it's wet. It's very, very wet at the moment. It's making me quite glad that I'm working in consultancy rather than farming, I've got to say at the moment. There are its plus sides, I've got to say.
Right, let's do a little bit of an introduction to the Isle of Man, because I'm guessing that most listeners won't have visited. Some basics first of all, I suppose. And I mean, Ean, maybe let's go to you on this. How many people live on the island? How is it governed? What are the major sort of settlements other than Douglas, obviously, that sort of kind of thing? Just give us a brief tourist guide, I suppose, to the Isle of Man.
The Isle of Man is situated in the middle of the Irish Sea. We're a self-governing island with a population of around about 85,000. We are a Crown dependency and part of the British Isles, but not part of the United Kingdom. We never were members of Europe, but we did have a protocol-free trading agreement through the UK, so we could trade into the UK and Europe. The island is around about 221 square miles, 75% of which is agricultural land. Douglas is our capital. Castletown is the former capital in the south of the island. Then in the west we have Peel, and in the north we have Ramsey. They're the main sort of towns, and the rest are sort of made up of rural villages.
So, I mean, you were both born and raised on the island. So, for both of you, I suppose, how has it changed over time? I'm just interested in your sort of memories of growing up. Ean, let's go to you on that first as well.
Feels a very safe place to live. It's probably more like United Kingdom was 25, 30 years ago, with a fairly low crime rate. You still go out at night time and don't bother locking your house. Quite often you'll park the car down the village and leave it all night, and you could leave the keys in it. Yeah. And we're very fortunate that we have practically zero rural crime. So that's a big benefit. It's a lot slower pace of life and probably a little bit limited for the younger generation, maybe. There's not quite the same nightlife and outgoings, though we have a really sort of good sport network throughout the island. So there's great opportunities sports-wise, especially with only a population of 85,000, which compared to, that's only like a sort of small town from your side, really.
Yeah. Harry, what was it like to grow up there?
I loved it. I'm introverted through and through, to be totally honest with you. So that kind of slow lifestyle suits me. I mean, coming into the UK, I don't think you realise how naive you are coming from such a small place until you actually come over here and really brace yourself to UK life. I mean, I only moved to Shropshire as far as Harper Adams is concerned, so it's probably the easiest transition as far as Isle of Man to the UK you could get. It was a safe place. I would say that, for young people, I think certainly since my dad's generation, it probably has the options to do as kind of a teenager and young adult probably have gone downhill. The island only has 1 or 2 nightclubs now, I think, off the top of my head, which compared to previous years, there used to be, I mean, Dad, you'll probably know far better than I do what it was like, but there were certainly a lot more. But no, I loved it. And certainly growing up on a farm as well, I was never bored of things to do. I spent pretty much every weekend and every school holiday either on my trials bike or working on the farm, or a combination of the two if we were gathering. So yeah, no, I loved it. And the big sports culture on the island was a huge plus point for me, really, because although we're such a small nation, we seem to do quite well as far as sports are concerned. We've got a few Olympians, we've got a few kind of national cyclists. We do quite well. We bat above our pay grade, I'd say.
This episode is being supported by our primary sponsor, A-Plan Rural. Why did I want to collaborate with A-Plan Rural? Well, having got to know them, their team shares my passion for giving a voice to farmers, and we are both driven to raise the profile of farming voices to a wider audience. So it seemed quite a good fit. Quite frankly, together we will be able to do a lot more. A-Plan Rural do a lot of work on social media themselves, sharing farming accounts and farming stories. They have a rural community blog which shares farmers' experiences, and they also support a growing number of initiatives that champion UK farmers, including this podcast. So a big thank you to A-Plan Rural for supporting Meet the Farmers. Let's talk a little bit about farming on the islands. Ian, just give us a bit of an intro to a bit of farming on the island, and again, just numbers of farmers, enterprises, that kind of thing.
Agriculture on the Isle of Man is predominantly grass-based. The type of climate we have and soil types, it's most suited to grass and livestock. We do have arable on the sort of northern plain, where there's also some horticulture as well, and also on the southern end of the Isle of Man, there's better soils and there's arable down there as well. Most farms do have an element of mix, but we are predominantly grass-based. There's sort of a central spine of hills run through the middle of the island, which is where moorland, heatherland, which is predominantly hill sheep. There's a few hill cows on them as well, but it's mostly hill sheep on those. Yeah. So the main parts of farming will be dairy, beef and sheep, and an element of arable as well.
Yeah. I think I've read somewhere that, so that northern coastal part, if you got, that's eroding, isn't it?
Yeah, there's parts of it are quite sandy and have been eroding quite badly.
The history of that is it was all just coastal deposit, I think. So that's like, you've got the central kind of chunk of rock of the island that originally broke off from the UK years, and obviously thousands, millions of years ago. Then that was glacial deposit, which was all kind of compacted down. If you go along the beaches on the Isle of Man, you can actually see you can see right up to where the land is, and there's just this kind of face of sand, effectively.
Oh wow!
It's quite
that did fascinate me, because I sort of thought, well, isn't it just a lump of rock?
Yeah, a lump of rock and a bit of sand on the end.
Yeah, the very north of the Isle of Man was very, very sandy, and we did have quite a successful milling wheat sector of the island, sort of grown on the sandier land on the north. But unfortunately, that's really fallen by the wayside this last 12 months, because most of the wheat was processed through a local mill for flour. But the local bakery that took over 90% of that wheat closed down 12 months ago due to increased costs through it was sort of gas, and became unviable. So it's really sad to see that sector of the industry disappear.
Yeah, no, completely. So in terms of challenges right now, is there anything that's sort of specific to the island, would you say?
Like agriculture right across all the UK, increased costs of production have been the massive challenge running a business this last 2 years, especially. But it's probably exaggerated on the Isle of Man. We have probably one of the most expensive stretches of water to cross. The main ports at Heysham and Lancaster coming across to Douglas. It's 60 miles, and I think it's probably the dearest stretch of water in the world, to be honest. Wow. Fertilizer and feed have around about £50 to £60 a tonne shipping costs on them to fetch them into the island. Wow. So, when things are tight, that's just an extra bit that makes things so much more difficult.
Wow.
And then obviously it's double-edged, because certainly with beef and lamb, only about half to 2/3 of it's consumed on the island, the rest's exported. So that same shipping charge is on when we're exporting product as well. So it just makes what are already tight margins in a business even tighter.
Yeah. And in terms of your domestic market, is there any sort of premium in terms of what you're getting?
Not a premium in return to the farmer. It's probably dearer in the shops, but we've probably got a higher processing cost on the island. But while I'm sort of talking of all the negatives of that stretch of water, as far as a business, it also has positives as well. And in 2001, we managed to keep foot and mouth at bay. We're BVD free, we're TB free. And on the odd times we have had outbreaks of TB, they've been directly associated to imports. We've been able to isolate them and eradicate TB. So we've been eradicated from TB for quite a long time. But it's no coincidence we have no badges either.
Okay. Just drop that one in there. Harry, let's go to you. Because obviously you've been working and living in the UK for a little while now. What do you see as sort of the major differences that you've observed? And I'm thinking here mainly in terms of ag policy, which of course is something that you're dealing with day to day now in your job. So yeah, in terms of the policy direction, and Ian, I'll go over to you in this a bit, but in terms of the policy direction that the UK is sitting in the various aspects of the UK, I should say that in comparison to the Isle of Man, how do you see that?
I think the whole of Europe is going down the same direction, isn't it? That rather than paying farmers as food producers, we're paying farmers as stewards of the land to provide environmental benefits. You know, we've got a new common agriculture policy coming out in the EU. We've obviously had all the changes in England, Scotland, Wales. I will preface this that I work in England and my policy knowledge is predominantly England and a little bit the Isle of Man. So when I talk about UK policy, it's usually going to be England and its ELMS policy. It's moving down that direction of environmental payments. It's definitely the Isle of Man. But the best way I describe it, and I think I described it to you, Ben, at the conference we were at, the best way to imagine it is if you took BPS, cut it in half, took ELMS and these transition plan policies, cut that in half and welded them together. That's kind of where you'd see the general policy landscape. A bit of a gross oversimplification, but that's kind of the best way to describe it. There's still direct payments between 50 to 70% of what they were. And then you've got the AES scheme as well in the Isle of Man, which is the agri-environment scheme, which it's got similar elements to SFI and countryside stewardship, whereby you've got your revenue options that you can pay for. A weird distinction, though, is that in the Isle of Man, you pick the options each year. So whereas for a countryside stewardship agreement, you might pick, I don't know, GS2 and GS4, and then you're directly into them on those parcels for 5 years. In the Isle of Man, you get a form each year and you fill it out for the AES, and that can change each year. So you may have overwintered stubbled on 1 year, and then the next year that might go into temporary grassland with legume-rich swards. So that's kind of a differentiation. But I'd say the biggest difference between the Isle of Man and England is that it's a lot more dynamic on the Isle of Man. It's only a small jurisdiction. It can be a lot more tailored to the farmers. If we're going to take the average of the farms in the Isle of Man versus the average of the farms in the UK, the average in the Isle of Man is going to be a lot more representative of the average farmer, if that sort of makes sense, because there's far fewer of them. And there's this quite interesting element of Manx policy at the moment called the farmer initiatives, which I really like. And it's kind of a little bit like the farming and protected landscape scheme in the UK.
Okay.
Where you basically go as a farmer with a proposition to government. You go with a proposition for the environmental benefits, for how it's going to benefit your farm, how it's going to benefit your productivity. And if they think it's right, they will then pay you up to 60, or I think it's up to 80% of the cost. So it's kind of these tailored schemes for specific farms. But I think probably the best way I describe it is it's just more dynamic than the UK.
So Harry, in terms of Isle of Man policy, I suppose you have these 4 pillars, which I think are quite interesting because it's very different. Yeah, it is very different to what's happening in England. Say, can you just tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, no problem at all, Ben. So obviously in England, the whole policy is built around these buzzwords: public goods for public money. Whereas in the Isle of Man, it's a lot more focused towards the farmer, with the 4 key pillars: supporting active farmers, investment, the environment, and productivity. And supposedly those 4 features are meant to kind of work in a cyclical nature. So anything within the agri-environment scheme should, in theory, be hitting all 4 pillars. So, for example, paying to put a new hedgerow in, that is supporting an active farmer. It's putting investment into the farm. It's supporting the environment, and it should be supporting productivity as well with, improved infrastructure on farm. So that's kind of the way. It's a slightly different approach to what England's going down, I'd say.
Yeah. So you've got this self-governing landscape. So how does it work in terms of the regulators, I suppose? What's the setup on the islands, Ian?
We have a ministerial system, so we don't have Defra, we have Defra over here, which is the Department of Environment, Food and Agriculture. So we still got agriculture in the name of our one, unfortunately. And there's the minister there. I suppose we're very fortunate, especially like the NFU is the main recognised policy lobbying body over here. Every 2 months we get to meet with the minister. So we can sort of try and help direct policy. They don't always listen to us, but generally they do. And we did have quite a good input in when the agri-environment scheme came about. So we were able to sort of target what targets an active farm with environmental benefits is really what we were trying to challenge the scheme to do. And to be fair, it's been a little bit of a difficult transition, but we're getting there. A lot of farmers in the Isle of Man think it's overcomplicated and quite rigorous, but when I see some of the sort of work Harry's doing and some of the application processes you have in England especially, maybe our scheme's quite simple and quite dynamic, to be fair.
How long have you been involved with the Manx NFU?
I suppose I got involved 12 years after I lost my father. My father was heavily involved. He was past president. As a young farmer, I probably was just concentrating on work and socialising and less interested in policy, but always knew what was going on. And I suppose what triggered me to get involved was when I lost my father and took over the business, it's very difficult to try and direct your business if you don't know what direction policy is going in. Yep. So therefore, I found it was essential to be part of it. And the more I got part of it, I decided that if you can influence that policy that suits, then that's even better.
I want to turn on to Labour, which certainly in the UK is a massive issue, depending on what almost independent of sector at the moment. Do you have any Labour issues on the island?
Massive, yeah, exactly. It's exactly the same. To be fair, I'm very fortunate. My nephew works on the farm with us, and we've got another fellow that works with us and rope harry him when he's home and family. But if it wasn't for them, I think I'd really struggle. And it's not just agriculture in the Isle of Man. The hospitality trade especially is really suffering. We're quite fortunate. We have quite a vibrant finance sector in the Isle of Man, but sort of quite focused on finance and e-gaming. So there's great job opportunities there that pay significantly better than what manual type work can pay, especially agriculture and hospitality. And
Harry, you're sort of, a lot of your friends say, have many people sort of stayed on the island or moved elsewhere? Or
I think a lot of my age group, you need to remember my age group was influenced through COVID. So, the appeal of university was majorly turned down. But I think the Isle of Man, a big issue it does have is that kind of 20 to 35-year-old range is very, very absent. So of my friends, I'd say most of them probably went to university, I would say in general. And the ones that didn't, you got a lot of people leaving at GCSE at school, but most of the people that went through A-level then went straight onto university. But yeah, it's most people kind of move away. I don't know whether people will come back. I think certainly for me, the ultimate aim is to go back to the Isle of Man, but you do end up with that kind of gappy job ladder in the Isle of Man due to just, I guess, a lack of population. And for me, certainly, and my kind of ambition over here is I need to get myself up to a level of experience, I suppose, and a level of authenticity to then sidestep into a fairly decent role. And I think a lot of my friends are kind of the same mindset. I think you talk to most people and the Isle of Man will still be their home. They just might not live there, if that kind of makes sense.
No, completely.
I think it's fair to say, like, looking at it as an older person, looking down on the younger generation, you see a lot of people Harry's age leave the island and even settle across the water. But it's amazing the number that once they start to have a family, move back. It's just that safer sort of environment to bring a family up in. You'll sort of see quite a gap from sort of 25 to 35. But it's amazing how many, I know from my family members that moved away maybe for 10 years, it's amazing when they sort of get to sort of 35, settling down, having a family, especially with young children, how many then move back to the island.
Yeah, and I think, to be honest, you could widen that out to almost any part of the countryside, anywhere. You're going to see that same movement, aren't you, wherever you are? Do you have many links on the other side of the Irish Sea to Ireland? Is there much sort of cross movement of people that way?
there's people moving both ways. And it's amazing the amount of Irish workers that come over to the Isle of Man and sort of Irish people that settle over in the Isle of Man. Trade-wise is more limited because we have a twice daily direct sailing to Lancaster, whereas it's very limited. It's only a summertime service to Ireland. So therefore, trade-wise is limited because I've not long bought some bulls in Ireland about 3 weeks ago. And they've got to travel to Scotland and down to Lancaster to come in the Isle of Man when it's only about 35 miles or 40 miles the other way.
Your farm itself, I suppose. Give us an introduction to the farm and the enterprises.
We're a beef and sheep farm based in Laxey up on the hills. We're fairly marginal. 3,800 acres we class as hill and moorland. We run about 1,700 black ewes up on that area. We then have about 1,200 acres between sort of two sites of grassland, 1,000 of which I would say is improved or semi-improved grassland. We run 225 suckler cows, all spring calving, finish all the young stock as well off those, and around about 600 crossbred ewes, which are predominantly North of England mules.
How's calving going so far?
So far, we're only on the heifers at the moment. With cows due to kick in about another 10 days, about sort of 5th of April. We kick off on the cows, but yeah, we had quite a change in herd policy around about 5 or 6 years ago. We were traditionally Simmental Limousin cross cows with the Charolais bull as terminal sire. Big cows. We're a fairly, I say, marginal hill farm. I was looking for sort of something that would a little bit smaller, but still wean the sort of same size calf and utilise the grazing a little bit more. So we started switching over to stabilisers. Initially, that I was just going to use them on the heifers and the second calvers to breed sort of the right type of cow, suckler cow we'd been buying from the dairy herd, and then keeping more beef animals. And we were getting cows up at 750 kilos, and they were sort of too big, too heavy, and they were probably weaning lighter calves than we used to when we had little Angus cows. So the idea was to use the stabiliser just to breed a suckler cow to then put the Charolais over that. But to be fair, I've been that impressed with them and that blown away by them that every cow will be carved into a stabiliser bull. So it suits our system.
What about abattoirs? I'm assuming is there one in Douglas and that's it, or?
Yeah, we have a local abattoir and a local creamery. They're the two main processors on the Isle of Man. And as I say, we do have a small flour mill, but that's nearly redundant at the moment.
Yeah.
The creamery takes all, like every dairy farmer, there's about, I think there's about 35 dairy farmers on the Isle of Man. All the milk from there goes into the local creamery, a third of which is liquid milk sales on the island. And the rest of that will go into cheese production, which is obviously taking a little bit of a hit at the moment, the way cheese prices have gone. And the abattoir will probably process around about 2/3 of the red meat produced on the Isle of Man, and the rest will be sort of sold across to England for stores.
So I've never tried a Manx cheese. That is definitely one on my list for sure.
To be fair, credit to the creamery, they've got a real good marketing. They're on Emirates Airways, and they're putting a lot into America and all around the world. They're doing quite well.
Yeah, I think the creameries are probably a really good example of how in the Isle of Man you can kind of bank on this real sense of identity. There is a real strong sense of identity in the Isle of Man, and I think if you ask most people in the Isle of Man, they'd be very proud to call themselves Manx rather than British. Yeah. If that kind of makes sense. And if you walk into pretty much any house in the Isle of Man, the Isle of Man Creameries has a monopoly on milk damn near, and you'll walk in and see Isle of Man Creameries milk in their distinctive cartons. And up until probably 12 months ago, you walked into most households, you'd see Ramsey Bakery bread. But as Dad said, sadly, that's shut down due to the rising input costs. But yeah, I mean, that's an opportunity on farming in the Isle of Man, in that there is that sense of identity and there's a bit of a story behind all the produce.
Just a little more about our primary sponsor, A-Plan Rural. They provide bespoke insurance cover for farms and estates. This could be for anything from tractors and machinery to a new exciting diversification venture. So for more information, visit aplan.co.uk/rural. That's aplan.co.uk/rural. Where would you say the opportunity is on your farm going forward in what is a very challenging time?
I think there's an opportunity going forward for ourselves. I see as you know, as I say, the stabilizer suits our farm. I think there probably is an opportunity going forward once we get sort of the more pure to sell breeding females across to the UK, because that TB-free, BVD-free status should give us an opportunity to sell a premium breeding product off farm. But there is a great opportunity that's probably getting missed through our local abattoir. It's going through a lot of change at the moment, and we've got a great story to tell in the Isle of Man. The furthest any animal can travel to the abattoir is about 20 miles. So farm to fork is a very short journey. It's a lovely green island in the middle of the Irish Sea. We curse the fact that we have small fields, and I think we've got the smallest average size fields in the world, the highest number of hedgerows per square kilometre than any other nation, which we've always seen as a sort of a negative. But I think going forward, there's a real positive off that with the whole carbon sequestration, the amount of carbon hedgerows are sequestering. And because of our high input costs, we've probably always been using a little bit less fertiliser due to the sheer cost of it, that it will be a benefit going forward with our carbon footprint. The work we're doing so far with the NFU on doing carbon audits non-farm, and we're hoping to sort of get that rolled out to get every farm done, like audited over the next year or two. I think it's a great marketing opportunity for Isle of Man produce.
Harry, let's go over to you and what you've been doing on your placement. I'm interested to hear more.
I mean, placement-wise, I work for a company called SRH Agribusiness, which we're based in the Northwest, and it's just a small team of consultants. There's 3 of us working full-time, and we've got another part-time consultant and 1 associate consultant. For us, we want to be seen as people want a high specialist grant doing. They want a really good countryside stewardship application doing. They want, those sorts of grants and schemes complete. We want to be seen as a specialist in that area, especially in our jurisdiction within the Northwest. We're hopefully not just putting together countryside stewardship applications for the sake of it with a few B3 options on hedgerows. We're putting together really good applications that suit the farm. But beyond that, we deal with a lot of business strategy. We deal with an awful lot of business forecasts on, specialist bank panels and for loans and stuff like that. But yeah, that's kind of been where I've been looking into a lot this year, and I've got to say I've learned so much. This is steep disrespect to Harper, and yeah, absolutely. And this is nothing on Harper. Harper's a fantastic university, but in the last 9 months, I've probably learned far more than I did in the first 2 years of university, and I think that's credit to the placement process at university. You just learn so much, and it also defeats that paradox that you need experience to get experience a lot of the time, especially in these niche industries such as agriculture consultancy. If you've got one person coming out of a university with absolutely no experience and just book knowledge, and you've got one person who's got a full year of experience working in an industry, a paid industry where there's responsibility, it's really going to help.
Looking forward to going back to Harper?
Yeah, no, I am looking forward to it. I'm really looking forward to it, I've got to say. Yeah, no, I'm really looking forward to going back to Harper. It's going to be a weird. Yeah, I mean, it's a weird one. I mean, obviously having your own money is nice for one. I know that's quite a materialistic viewpoint, but it's quite nice to see the bank balance on average going up every month rather than going down every month. But no, I am looking forward to going back. It's bizarre because when you're in year 1 and 2 of university, you think, wow, this is such a high workload, it's so much. And I'll probably be going back now, but like, right, I'll do about 4 hours of work, and then just as long as you're actually productive, keep it to a timesheet or something like that, it should be an awful lot easier, or at least keep it to that 9 to 5. But no, I am looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to getting back and seeing everyone more than anything, and utilising what I've learned on my placement this year. I look ahead to some of the assignments next year, and it's like, you've got to go out to a farmer, for example, and build a report based on that business. And it's like, well, me and my colleague have been doing this for
done that.
9 months quite easily. Yeah, it's kind of already ticked off the box. Done grant applications that are near 12,000 words. I think the biggest one was. So, it should be quite good going back to university. It should be quite relaxing. I might mark my words, mind you.
I probably shouldn't say I'm a massive fan of Simon and all the work he's doing there, and all the other projects he has as well. So it's no surprise to me at all that you've been getting along well there. We're just going to move briefly onto the part of the show where we discuss wider farming issues, and the one that you actually wanted to focus in on was cost of inputs, which is sort of what everyone's talking about all the time at the moment, but we're going to focus on this. And I suppose whether you think this might drive innovation as farmers will need to adapt? It's one of those classic Harper questions you're going to get. Harry, let's go straight over to you.
Oh, absolutely is, isn't it? I mean, I can look at this from two perspectives. I've now got kind of a farming hat and I've got my consultancy hat, and it's sometimes easy, I think, when you're working with it every day to kind of get disgruntled and get lose hope. But I think when you step back, certainly in my consultancy role where I'm not necessarily directly involved in it, you can see some major innovation coming on. And I think adversity drives innovation, doesn't it? It's always the case. You see, it sounds horrendous, but in war times, you see some of the biggest innovations and the biggest, moves in technology. And I think although it's on a lower scale, we will see some big innovations. For example, we're already seeing around the world drone applications of fertilizers, really precise applications becoming involved. You're seeing far greater uptakes of GPS technology on farm. And I think just the move from that basic fertilizer spreader, the one where you're pulling the hydraulic lever and, you're just putting so much on, it's going to move to your more highly electronic ones. I know, Dad, you've just recently purchased a new fertilizer spreader for that exact reason, I think.
Okay.
And just even better use of organic manures, better use of things like biochar that could potentially, it seems like this wonder material that no one really knows that much about, but it's certainly got an awful lot of, how would you say, a lot of opportunities and just better utilization of the fertilizer within the soils. I think, I do think once we get out the other side, it will probably be better off. They might still be quite expensive. I don't think they'll ever come back down, will they?
No, yeah, we'll see, but I doubt it. Ian, with your NFU hat on, what are your, I suppose, members across the wider island? How are they seeing this at the moment? And are you seeing any short-term impacts in terms of, I suppose, decision making on farm?
It's certainly had a massive impact on everybody's business this last 2 years as the rising cost. I think people have become a lot more focused on what they're doing, rather than just blanketly spreading fertilizer by a calendar. We've all become a lot more conscious of clover and what we can do with clover, more conscious with soil testing and applying what is necessary rather than just putting fertilizer on because you've got the fertilizer spreader on. I think that it'll make the industry stronger and more resilient, those that get through this, because I don't think we will go back to fertilizer at £200 a ton like we had a number of years ago. Like, it has come back quite significantly this last few months, but I think we're probably back as far as it's going to come in the short term. I suppose the worry is that commodity prices have dropped, certainly in the cereal sector, so it's going to make that very difficult for producing profitably this next year. The beef and lamb price, the beef price has sort of risen more lately to cover the costs, but the lamb price, it's quite worrying where it's at compared to where it was 12 months ago. So
yeah, for sure.
I think as an industry, we've got to become a lot more business focused. We've got to be really on top of our costs, benchmarking, budgeting, and it's the resilient, strong, innovative sort of members of the industry that are going to really survive, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I think it will drive this move of farming businesses not necessarily seeing themselves as farmers, but rather these rural businesses, which are, you're looking into all your data, you're looking into exactly how much fertilizer you're applying. It's not as simple as just kind of staying out in the field. There will be an element of bookwork to it. There's an element to actually sitting down and really looking into this data and how we're going to best utilize all these inputs and these very, very expensive things.
Are you seeing any farmers come to you, Ian, saying that they're thinking of leaving the industry?
Maybe not leaving, but there's this last 12 months, there's been a lot of phone calls from very concerned members of the industry. And I think that the worrying aspect as well, which we're facing in the Isle of Man, and probably we just not long come back from the NFU conference at Birmingham there, and it was a similar message there. I think the biggest worrying factor I see is the age profile of the industry. We've got to really focus on attracting young members of the industry to enter the industry, but we've got to have a profitable, viable industry to encourage them into, haven't we? That's a huge challenge. Short term, yes, rising input costs are very, very worrying, but longer term, if we don't encourage that next generation to come in, but we shouldn't be encouraging them to come in unless it's a viable, profitable industry, then that's going to be the biggest challenge that UK agriculture faces, I think.
That might lead us nicely onto the final two questions, which we ask everyone else before the end of the show. The first is your message for the public, and I'm going to ask you both this question. Harry, I'm going to go to you first on this.
Yeah, I mean, Dad and I were having a chat about this before the interview started, and I think we're really aligned on it. That I think as a public, and certainly the Isle of Man as well, we really need to value our farmers and value what we're doing in UK agriculture in general. You know, for example, you've got the climate committee coming out with these reports saying that, yeah, we need to eat less meat, for example, but we need to eat higher quality meat. And, you know, grass-fed British beef is exactly what that is. You know, we need to value food production, as we've seen over the last 12 months. Sorry, it's not a given. You know, the world supply chain is not a given anymore. And I think we are going to have to rely a lot more on ourselves as an island nation in the Isle of Man and an island nation in the UK on what we actually produce. And maybe it might be more expensive, British produce, but we need to view it more as a better value product.
Ian, your message to the public?
I suppose it's very similar. We have a world growing population. We have a smaller area through climate change that we can actually produce food on. Food security really is going to be a major issue, I think, over the next 10 years. The Isle of Man is a little bit guilty of saying food security is the boat sailing every day. But to be fair, the UK is not that much different, is it? It's very much reliant on imports as well at the expense of the British farmer. And I think the general public really need to look at where their food comes from, make sure they are genuinely, when they think they're buying British produce, Isle of Man produce, genuinely make sure they are. Is it generally produced in the UK, or is it just manufactured in the UK, or the same for the Isle of Man? I think it's vital that people really think about their diet, where their food comes from, and value where it comes from, and support the farmer, because if we're not there, the human race doesn't exist.
Big words, but it's true. And finally, always the difficult one, a message for farmers. This could be farmers in the Isle of Man, it could be farmers generally. Harry, will go to you on this one first.
I think I've got to answer this with my consultancy hat on. Don't be afraid of change, I think, is my big one. You know, the worst words in farming are we've always done it that way. You know, no other industry you look at will look exactly the same now as it did 20 years ago. Look at all the technology improvements. Go to an office, for example, it's going to be completely different. And I think it's exactly the same in farming. We all want to do the same thing as what we did 20 years ago, but it's not necessarily always the answer. And we need to move with the times as an industry and really be embracing these technologies, embracing the younger generation, and embracing what different policies can offer. I think if you ask any farmer, they'd obviously rather farm without subsidies. But in the reality of the world we live in, oftentimes you have to embrace those kind of climate policies, and you need to see yourself as a rural business rather than a farming business. So if you have to integrate some of these environmental policies, if you have to slightly remove your production in order to make your whole farm more profitable, don't be afraid of that.
And Ian, your message to farmers on the Isle of Man and farmers in the UK?
Oh, I suppose mine's a little bit briefer and a bit more sort of simple than Harry's, but I think it's very much, you've got to know your own data, you've got to know the data and make decisions based on that data, because every business is facing challenges, and if you don't know the data and understand the data, you can't make educated decisions about your business, can you?
And finally, and you can both or either of you can answer this, any recommendations for blogs, podcasts, social media accounts to follow? Those can be farming or non-farming. Anything you want to give a shout out to?
Apart from your own, Ben, apart from this one, the one that I found really quite stimulating and thought-provoking lately is on the Pasture Pod, the series It's About Time.
Oh, it's so good, isn't it?
Really,
yeah.
I found myself listening to them twice, and I found that really thought-provoking. So I highly recommend that.
Yeah, no, Michael has done an amazing job with that.
Mine's a bit of a boring answer compared to that, I'm afraid, and it's coming purely from my consultancy perspective. I think as a farmer, if you're not signed up to the Defra in the UK blogs, you're really missing a trick, because policy is changing so quickly at the moment. If we've got all these different grants and schemes available, get on them, and before you miss them. You don't want to hear about them 6 months down the line when you've already put up a new slurry store, or you've already invested in a new robotic milking system. But from my personal perspective, I think maybe not quite as educational as what my dad said there, but I quite like watching the Grassmen on YouTube. I quite like it.
I know that also. I think that is the first time that anyone has actually ever done a shout out for the Defra blogs, but it's a very good one. So thank you for that.
I didn't say they're good. Didn't say they're good reads. I said they're useful reads.
That is it for today. We will leave it there. But a massive thank you to Harry and Ian for coming on the show. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe to the show wherever you're listening. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Next week, I will be joined by Charles Anyon from Lincolnshire. Thanks again to Harry and Ian for today, and to our primary podcast sponsor, A-Plant Rural Insurance, for supporting the show. Please see the show notes for more information and for any links mentioned today. For now, though, I'm Ben Eagle. This has been Meet the Farmers. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you have a great week.